Brilliance Audio presents the unabridged recording of Rewire. Change your brain to break bad habits, overcome addictions, conquer self-destructive behavior. By Richard O'Connor, Ph.D. Performed by Fred Stella.
St. Paul to the Romans. I do not do what I want, but I do the very thing I hate. Author's note. I'm a psychotherapist by training with 30-plus years of practice and several books I'm proud of. I know a lot about theories of the mind and psychopathology, about the techniques of psychotherapy. But in looking back over my career, I've realized how limited our approaches are. Many people come to therapy because they are somehow getting in their own way, unable to get what they want, sabotaging their best efforts, unable to see how they put up barriers to intimacy, to success, to happiness. It takes a lot of hard therapeutic work for us to discover how they're doing it to themselves, and even more work to help them learn to do things differently. And of course, I see the same things in myself, bad habits I was sure I would have outgrown by now. To our chagrin, we remain persistently ourselves. Self-destructive behavior is a universal human problem that has garnered little professional attention. It's not the subject of many books. That's probably because most theories hold that self-destructive actions are always a symptom of some underlying problem, like addiction or depression or a personality disorder. But there are many people who don't fit a standard diagnosis who can't seem to get out of their own way. Too often, our behavior takes on a life of its own and turns into a pit we can't crawl out of, even if we're aware that it makes us miserable. Then, there are self-destructive patterns that we don't see, but that still hurt us over and over. Often, most of the work in psychotherapy is about these issues. The bottom line is that there are powerful forces within us that resist change, even when we can clearly see what would be good for us. Bad habits die hard. It seems as if we have two brains, one wanting the best for us, and the other digging in its heels in a desperate, often unconscious effort to hold on to the status quo. New knowledge about how the brain works is helping us to understand this divided self, giving us guidance and hope that we can do more to overcome our fears and resistances. Psychotherapists can help a great many people, but we have far too many dissatisfied customers who didn't get what they came for. This book is addressed to those who have been disappointed, to those who don't expect any help, who feel they're doomed to keep on shooting themselves in the foot, and to those who never thought of therapy, but who know they can sometimes be their own worst enemy, which probably takes in most of the world. There is plenty of reason for hope now, from many different fields in psychology and brain science, which together will give you a roadmap to overcoming whatever self-destructive habits are troublesome to you. Chapter 1. Two brains not working together. Most of us find ourselves too often repeating the same mistakes, stuck in bad habits, and few of us understand why. Procrastination, lack of assertion, disorganization, smoking, overworking, poor sleep habits, lack of consideration, depressed shopping, internet addiction, all the way up through drug addiction and deliberate self-harm. Generally, we know what we're doing to ourselves and we keep promising to reform. Indeed, we do try often enough, but these habits are hard to break. Every time we try but fail, we become more hopeless and more critical of ourselves. Self-destructive habits like these are the greatest source of unnecessary misery in our lives. Such habits cover the territory from not flossing to suicide, from binge eating to passivity, from the deliberate to the unconscious. Bad habits like procrastinating, eating too much, or not getting enough exercise seem to be just part of being human. If these habits don't go too far, they won't hurt you much. But they can make you feel guilty and can eat away at your self-esteem. Guilt serves a purpose if it gets us to change our ways, but too often we don't, and then we carry an unnecessary burden around. Other bad habits may impact your work and social life: avoiding the spotlight, not being assertive, procrastinating, staying stuck in a bad job or relationship. Or you may do things that hurt you directly: too much drinking or drugging, cutting yourself, taking dangerous chances, getting into fights, developing an eating disorder. You've probably tried many times to stop because it seems like it should be so easy. You know very well what the right choice is, yet you keep making the wrong one. Why in the world can't you stop? If that inability to do the right thing when it's obvious wasn't bad enough, there are also many self-destructive habits that we're not even aware of: driving carelessly, being thoughtless, not listening, neglecting our health. A lot of this unconscious self-destructive behavior gets played out in our relationships. When I see couples, I sometimes sit with a mounting sense of dread because I can see how one partner is working himself up to say the exact words that are guaranteed to set off an explosion in the other. These are not angry words. They're meant as words of understanding, but they betray a complete lack of understanding. What infuriates the other partner is this reenactment of not getting it. Like these unfortunate partners, we often follow unconscious scripts that lead us to say or do exactly the wrong thing, and we can't understand why it's wrong. Other people who may be self-destructive without realizing it include prescription drug abusers, people who are inconsiderate of others, and people who are too self-sacrificing. People who are stuck in bad relationships and people who just can't learn to manage money. Then there are times when we can see a problem, but we can't see at all how we contribute to it. We just know we have no close friends, or we're always in trouble at work. Though there can be other causes, most self-destructive behavior is the result of the fact that we have two minds that don't communicate very well. They give us conflicting advice, usually beneath our awareness, and we often choose without thinking. Put very simply, it seems as if we have a thoughtful, conscious, deliberative self and an automatic self that does most of the work of living without our attention. The conscious self can certainly make mistakes, but it's our automatic self that usually causes trouble. It's guided by motives and prejudices we're not aware of, our own unique frames of reference that are not in sync with reality, old habits of doing things in a particular way, feelings we try to deny. The automatic self directs most of our behavior, especially spontaneous actions. The conscious self is in charge when we take the time to think about our choices, but it can only focus on one thing at a time. Meanwhile, we're making many other decisions, both for good and for ill. The automatic self has us quickly gobble the potato chip, while the conscious self is distracted. The conscious brain has the job of checking facts and correcting our automatic responses when they lead to bad outcomes. But the truth is that it has much less control over our actions than we want to believe. The trick in overcoming self-destructive behavior is not so much to strengthen the conscious self so we can control ourselves better, though that helps sometimes. Rather, we must train the automatic self to do things like make wiser decisions unconsciously, ignore distractions, withstand temptations, see ourselves and the world more clearly, and interrupt our reflexive responses before they get us in trouble. Meanwhile, the conscious self has its work cut out in helping us get to know ourselves better, facing some aspects of ourselves that we'd rather keep hidden, expanding our knowledge of the world, and teaching us to view ourselves with compassion at the same time as we practice self-discipline. Thus, most of the time, when you do something you regret, your automatic self is at work, while no part of your brain is considering the consequences. Sometimes the automatic self is motivated by a desire to protect some aspect of the mind that remains unconscious. Sometimes it's just a little dumb or lazy or distracted. But, as you'll see, it's not impossible to detect our unconscious motives, habits, and assumptions at work. It requires self-awareness, the practice of certain skills that don't occur to us naturally. That's what much of this book is about. It may seem a lot to ask in an age of quick fixes, when pills are supposed to cure us instantly and insurance companies pay for only 8 weeks of psychotherapy. But if you've struggled with behaviors like these for any amount of time, and who among us hasn't, you know there are no quick fixes. We seem to be perpetually drawn back to our old bad habits, as if we're caught in a tractor beam. So bear with me as we talk about how to get to the heart of your self-destructive ways and learn to control the hidden forces that seem to make us do things we don't want to do. It does involve sometimes facing hard truths about ourselves, but in doing so, we can open ourselves up to a vastly more successful, productive, and happy life. So, escaping from self-destructive behavior patterns is a big challenge. But there's also big news in science that is cause for optimism. The idea of the plastic changeable brain. The recognition that our brains change and grow physically in response to life experience. New brain cells are constantly being formed. New networks between cells keep growing as we learn new things. Neuroscientists know now that bad habits have a physical existence in the structure of the brain. They become the default circuits when we are faced with temptation. Depression burns out joy receptors. Anxiety develops a hair trigger. But now we also know that we can rewire the brain to develop healthier circuitry. Scientists can see this happen with the latest imaging equipment. People tormented by obsessive thoughts can see how their brains change as they learn to master their thought processes. Healthy habits become easier. Joy receptors regenerate and anxiety loses its grip. It takes consistency and practice, but it's well within your reach. People believe they lack willpower, but willpower is not something you either have or don't, like blue eyes. Instead, it's a skill like tennis or typing. You have to train your nervous system as you would train your muscles and reflexes. You have to take yourself to the psychic gym. But with the certainty that each time you practice an alternative behavior, you've made it easier to do next time. Why we do things that hurt us remains one of the greatest mysteries of the human mind. It seems so contradictory. Most of our actions are motivated by things that give us pleasure, pride, love, a sense of mastery. It's called the pleasure principle. And it explains a great deal of human behavior. Why then do we sometimes do things that can be predicted to make us feel bad or get in the way of what we want? The historical answer was the devil, original sin, a curse, a hex, an imp, or some other evil operating in our lives. In the modern era, without those beliefs no one can explain. Freud had to invent the death instinct, thanatos, a primal force within us that drives us to destruction. That's an idea that has generally been abandoned for lack of evidence. Jung's concept of the shadow self, the parts of ourselves that we deny but that still influence our choices, turns out to be more fruitful. Of course, there are things that bring us short-term pleasure at the expense of long-term pain: overeating, gambling, drinking. Still, you would think we could learn more easily after repeated painful experiences to change our habits. And then there's the undertow. The fact that after years of successfully controlling self-destructive behavior, something can set us off, and soon we're right back where we started. I'm not going to claim that I have the answer to the mystery of self-destructive behavior. But I have found that most often it can be explained through a relatively small number of scripts that we seem to keep repeating. These scenarios are in part about the hidden motivations that tempt us, or scripts that, once begun, have to be followed through to their particular sad end. Rather like a tragic play that you watch horrified as it unfolds to its inevitable conclusion. The motives, feelings, and thinking behind these patterns are usually not accessible to us, therefore unconscious, except in our moments of deep soul-searching or in therapy. But they're not so deeply hidden that the listener won't recognize his or her own scenarios immediately on hearing about them. We may be unaware of these patterns, although our good friends and loved ones can often see them at work because distance gives them objectivity. Social conventions prohibit them from telling us about it. And we probably wouldn't listen anyway. In therapy, these patterns emerge only after some close scrutiny of the mechanisms of our unhappiness. But you may well recognize your patterns at work as you listen to this book. When you do, remember that each scenario represents a chance for us to learn something hidden about ourselves. Understanding misplaced rebellion requires us to learn about the role of emotions in our lives, and why we sometimes want to ignore what they tell us. To overcome the fear of success, we need to learn the skills of mindfulness, skills that will benefit us in many other aspects of our lives. Overcoming these patterns of self-destruction requires a great expansion in our understanding of ourselves. This is a difficult thing to do. After all, there must be powerful forces behind your self-destructive behavior if it's really hurting you. If it were easy, you would have stopped long ago. Besides that, most of us only want to stop our most glaring self-destructive patterns. Otherwise, we're quite fine, thank you.